Human beings have had a major impact on Earth, more than any other species. We gradually used and modified our planet's resources to fit our needs. Today, more than ever, we enjoy more comfortable lives than any of our predecessors. Technology allowed most parts of the world easier access to electricity, food, transportation, and so much more. However, our boom in technology is a double-edged sword. While our spectacular progress is raising more people out of poverty, it's also creating a disaster of unimaginable proportions and will get much worse if nothing is done to remediate. That disaster is none other than climate change. Most human activities, from generating electricity to operating motorized vehicles, producing food, or manufacturing materials like plastic, release enormous amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And that's where climate change kicks in. In a nutshell, sunlight reaches the surface of the Earth, which warms it up and allows our planet to be livable. However, the Earth doesn't hold that energy forever. If it did, the heat of the planet would make our lives a nightmare. Instead, a part of that energy gets released back towards space. And that's where we have an issue. Some of the sun's energy stays in the atmosphere as it gets absorbed by greenhouse gases we emit. This causes greenhouse molecules to vibrate faster, which warms up the atmosphere and makes the planet hotter. To make this phenomenon more relatable, think of parking a car outside during a hot summer. Once you go back into the car after a while, the interior of the vehicle is much hotter than outside because the heat of the sun was trapped in it. On a yearly basis, humans release about 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases, which causes an increasing amount of heat to be trapped in the atmosphere. The question is, what kind of damage is climate change causing? Too many to make a brief summary, but let's get through some of its greatest hits. Climate change increases the rate of destructive wildfire. This happens because a warmer ecosystem causes air to absorb more moisture from plants and soil. As a result, they get drier and more prone to burning. A dramatic example of wildfire increase is that of California. In that state, there's 5 times more wildfire than there was in the 1970s. According to the World Health Organization, from 1998 to 2017, wildfires and volcanic activities impacted the lives of 6.2 million people. It contributed to severe disruptions of transportation, communication, water supply, the deterioration of air quality, and property losses. Hurricanes are getting more devastating. A warmer climate causes more water to be evaporated into the atmosphere, which becomes fuel for more destructive storms. This can have a disproportionate impact on a nation's economy. Think of the ravage inflicted in 2017 by Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. Studies estimated that the storm set the island's infrastructure back more than 2 decades. Climate change causes floods. As the planet gets warmer, polar ice melts and seawater expands, causing sea levels to go up. This puts at risk lands that are located near coastlines. In Bangladesh, for instance, river floods and cyclones make it common for 20 to 30% of the country to be submerged underwater. As a result, crops and homes get destroyed. Numerous people lose their lives through this disaster. By 2100, it's estimated that sea levels around Miami will rise by nearly 2 feet, which would effectively sink a considerable part of the city. Next, we're facing a drastic reduction of Earth's biodiversity. As the planet's temperature is rising, the animals we eat and get milk from will be considerably less productive, as they'll be more likely to die young. The world's agricultural input will also be reduced by a large margin. This will be particularly hard for poor countries where a sizable part of the population relies on agriculture to make a livelihood. In sub-Saharan Africa, farmers' growing season could be reduced by 20%, causing millions of acres of land to be significantly drier. In China, severe droughts will cause the depletion of agricultural outputs. As the country provides rice, wheat, and corn to a fifth of the world's population, it could be the trigger for an international food crisis. If the planet's global temperature rises by 2%, coral reefs could completely vanish from the face of the Earth. As they go, marine life will progressively follow in their footsteps, destroying a major food source for over 1 billion people worldwide. The shrinkage of our planet's biodiversity will inevitably lead to an increase of food prices and could put the world's economy on its knees. Now that we've summarized a few disasters that would come with climate change, is there anything we can do to stop it? The answer is yes, there is, but it will not be an easy feat to accomplish. The first and biggest complication to stopping climate change is that greenhouse gas emission is associated with nearly all aspects of human activities. The main causes of greenhouse gas emission can be classified in 5 categories. Producing materials like cement, steel, and plastic represents 31% of the world's emissions. Electricity usage represents 27%. Food production represents 21%. We have 19% for the transportation industry. Temperature regulation systems like air conditioning, heating, and refrigeration contribute to 7% of the world's emissions. In other words, stopping climate change would require that we change the way we do just about everything. The second complication has to do with what's needed to make an impactful change. Over the long run, humans won't just need to decrease their emissions. From 51 billion tons of emissions per year, we'll eventually need to get down to net zero. This is because greenhouse gas remains in the atmosphere for a very long time. For instance, studies show that about 1/5 of carbon dioxide emitted today will still be around in 10,000 years. Think of the Earth like a bathtub that's slowly filling up with water. Even if we decrease the flow of water, the tub will eventually be filled, and water will spill out onto the floor. That being said, just because bringing the global emission to zero will be challenging doesn't mean that it can't be done. Here are a few actions we could implement in order to reach that goal. First and foremost, it's crucial to set policies that help the world transition toward a carbon-neutral economy. Government policies such as tax rules and economic incentives that regulate environmental regulations are effective ways to make companies implement more actions to benefit society. When it comes to climate change, the laws and regulations that we have today are outdated. An example of that is America's well-known law related to air quality, the Clean Air Act. Not only does it barely mention the term greenhouse gas, but it was originally passed in 1970, which naturally means that it was not set to address the issues that we're facing today. Next, we can further rely on alternative energy sources to sustain our modern lives. Today, we consume more energy by burning fossil fuels, which inflicts a severe toll on the environment. The silver lining is that we have other sources that can get us to zero emission. Among them, we have renewable energy, mostly solar and wind. The most promising candidate that we currently have is nuclear energy. Although that source is subject to strong controversies, it could be reliably used on a global scale if proper laws are set to regulate its usage. Nuclear energy is already being widely used in some countries. France, for instance, gets 70% of its electricity from nuclear plants. The United States gets 20% of its electricity from the same source. Last, but certainly not least, we'll need to create demand for clean energy sources so that we can trigger innovation. In order to fully engage large corporations and governments in getting to zero emission, raising awareness of climate change won't be enough. There also needs to be a large market for it, a financially appealing one. One of the hurdles to making progress in clean energy is that it's more costly. Because fossil fuel is a relatively cheap alternative, transitioning toward cleaner sources will cost more to develop by producers and more to acquire by consumers. If people opt for clean energy more often, companies will compete in its distribution. More investment will be made in research and development in order to make it cost-efficient. Whenever a consumer opts for an electric car, a plant-based burger, or an electric heat pump, a message is sent that their market exists, which will eventually trigger a chain of innovation that would allow the production of more convenient and less expensive products using clean energy. Today, climate change is one of the biggest problems we have, and if nothing is done to stop it, it will be the only problem we have.